changing depending on which time zone you are because in this group we are multicultural. Today in Dubai, the sun is shining and it is hot with highs of 40 degrees Celsius. We are joined in the studio by Samina, who will be directing our client through the exercises. So without further ado, let's avoid the Canadian hypothermia and head to Saudi Arabia. Have a nice trip! Welcome back. I hope you had a great trip. Today we will start off straight away with the beautiful Mrs. Nafsa doing the weight-bearing lunge test, followed by the straight leg raise, and closely after the shoulder reach. We will then finish off the exercises with the Y testing, and then finally end our presentation with the marvelous Maria. Let's get started. So as you can see here, Miss Nafsa is performing the weight-bearing lunge test on her right leg. This is the active test, as she is doing it with no help. Samina has informed me that her right leg, the distance from knee to toe, is 2 centimeters, putting Mrs. Nafsa in zone 1. Here, as you can see, her knee is straight and parallel to the stick that Samina is holding. This is a good shape and good form. If you then look at her left leg, which we'll see shortly, the distance from knee to toe is a little bit better than her right leg. It is at 3 centimeters, but she stays within zone 1, which is better than her right side, which is good. We then move on to the active testing. Here, Mrs. Nafsa has improved her distance from knee to toe. Her right leg has gone up by 2 centimeters, which is now 4 centimeters, which still puts her in zone 1. Her left, however, has stayed the same at 3 centimeters, also still in zone 1. Now here we have the straight leg raise. We start off by the active again. And as you can see, Samina is making sure that her thigh stays on the ground. Here, Mrs. Nafsa is in zone 2 for her right leg. And then now onto the left leg. You can see that she's also in a very similar angle and positioning to her right leg, which also puts her in zone 2. Move on to the passive, where she's aiding herself with her hand. As you can see, she's a bit further than the last one, which brings her a little bit slightly into the beginning of zone 3, which is a good improvement. Let's see her left leg. Yes, it seems like it is the same as her right leg. She has improved from her active test and done better in her passive test, which is usually what we see in clients. Now we move on to the shoulder reach. Here Samina is showing her mother how to place her hand. Here we have Samina showing us where her C7 vertebrae is. This will allow us to measure her distance from her fist to her C7. Her right side, as you can see, is on -1, not even reaching her C7. Her left side is the same. This puts her in zone 1 for both her right and left on the active testing. If we move on to the passive, you can see that Mrs. Nafsa has done better. She has gone right on top of her C7 with her right hand and past her C7 with her left, leading her to zone 2. Almost there, folks. So as you can see here, she's doing the Y testing. If you observe, Sam has put the measurements on the bottom right. Here you can see she has a good reach and quite a good stability on both of her legs. Her right composite is 92.4, whereas her left composite is 84.0. She has a good knee position maintained throughout this exercise. So that's it from me today, guys. That's the wrap up. And we will now go on to the Marvelous Maria, as I promised you at the beginning. Thank you so much for participating and listening and taking time out of your day for this. We will now proceed to travel all the way around the world back to Canada.
Thank you, Malvina, for the very insightful commentary. For the first question, as you can observe from Mrs. Nafsa, there were differences between the active and passive mobility tests. In the weight-bearing lunge, the passive mobility of the right leg increased by 2 centimeters from the knee to the toes, albeit the left leg had no change. Secondly, the straight leg raise. Both legs increased the same amount from the active to passive test. This resulted in the ankle passing the mid-thigh and entering into zone number 3 of the grading spectrum. The shoulder reach test. The right shoulder changed from -1 centimeters, as it was above the C7, to 0 centimeters, which is in zone number 1, and the left shoulder increased by 2 centimeters, which led the left shoulder to be in zone number 2. Overall, the differences between the two tests make sense, as the passive test is conducted using an external aid rather than natural movement. For the following question, I believe that Mrs. Nafsa's mobility had an influence on the interior component of the Y balance, but did not have an influence on the overall composite results. Since passive tests are not influenced by an individual's coordination and control, but active testing is, I will be observing the active testing for this component. According to the weight-bearing test, she scored slightly lower for her right leg than her left leg. This associated with the stability test, as the right anterior length reach was 82 centimeters while the left anterior length was 88 centimeters, also resulting in more of an imbalance in the right anterior than the left anterior reach. The client's other test values did not correlate to the Y balance results and were incomparable. Now for the final and last question. For client number 3, I would use the same test to assess mobility and stability. Since Georgia had undergone a right hip replacement, these tests will allow me to understand her weaknesses and strengths that she has while keeping track of her progress. The client's range of motion and stability will allow me to assess which exercises could cause a risk of injury. Depending on the results, I could work on improving the client's stability and mobility through certain practices, which will allow her to get back into exercising effectively while minimizing the risk of injury.